Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum to anyone who might be tuning in, and hello also to anyone who might be listening to this short recording. So I'm recording this in December 2019, and today I'm just going to talk a little bit about embarking on your spiritual path. And the reason why I'm doing this is because when you go on YouTube and you key in the word spirituality, mainly what you see is a lot of New Age practices and ideas and recommendations. So we can scroll back a bit with regard to why I came to Islam 20 years ago. Having known people who were interested in spirituality, but it was a kind of a spirituality that extracted elements of different traditions without having any ethical or moral or classical basis. So I knew people who were interested in crystals, interested in doing past life readings, interested in synchronicities, very much invested in the idea of a new age where mankind's consciousness is going to transform any second now. And a lot of these ideas that you see with regard to, say, chakras and this kind of thing, all exploring the ideas of, like I said, consciousness. And as I said, it didn't have an ethical or moral or classical basis, meaning that what we now have in the West, because the West essentially erased a classical initiatory tradition, I would say maybe by the end of the 18th century, probably even before, going back to the Renaissance. By the time of the Renaissance, we can even actually scroll back perhaps a bit further to Thomas Aquinas, that from this time onwards, like I said, there was this gradual erasure, if that's the right word, of a classical path towards the transcendent. And what we then have in Europe is a mixture of different derivative ideas, an amalgamation of different practices. As an example, the ideas of alchemic practice in the Renaissance, the ideas of an ancient Egyptian religion, solar-centric religion, with its roots in ancient Egypt, being practiced in Renaissance Europe. Actually, when you look quite closely at some of the texts that are talking about these alchemical traditions and practices, they do appear, like I said, to be quite derivative. So essentially we come up to the 20th century, 21st century, by which time, we could say even after the First World War, Europe becomes ultra-secular. And Christianity, as it is being practiced culturally, is pretty much defunct. And so, in the 60s, we start to see generations having chucked away Christianity, or the remnants of Christianity, looking east to places like India, and sampling elements of the Hindu religions, Sanatana Dharma, or Buddhism, or shamanism, and astrology, and a number of other ideas, as we know. But because these elements have been extracted out of these traditions. They have been taken out of their historical and social and political and spiritual context, and they are being recontextualized in an environment that is no longer rooted in any kind of understanding of wisdom, what we call hikmah, this wisdom that comes from being connected to higher realms. So this kind of hodgepodge and mixture that we see being practiced in the West, I would argue, doesn't really change a person's consciousness, because when you come out of the West and you reflect back upon the way of thinking and the way of being that has been cultivated in the West for the last 100 years, it becomes apparent how far we have to go to find our way back to an authentic initiatory tradition. There's going to have to be some radical rethinking, some radical alteration of the way we actually are in the West. And I would say most of the time, people raised in the West are not really aware of their way of being, in a sense, how alien that way of being is to cultures that are still rooted in their initiatory traditions. Which is kind of ironic, because obviously from the West looking out, other cultures look kind of exotic and other, as they say. Whereas actually it is the West, the Western secular tradition, if you want to call it, the Western secular history that has taken place for more than 100 years, maybe 200 years. It is this history that has actually made the Westerner other. We, as Westerners, have become other and alien or alienated. So, with the discovery of Islam, the Islamic tradition, which I made over a number of years, as I said, more than 20 years ago, I discovered the remnants, not a tradition that is intact or complete anymore, but the remnants of an authentic orthodox initiatory tradition. And so I wanted to attach myself to this tradition because of its sheer wealth of wisdom teachings. And that wisdom is based upon classical ethics and morality. You cannot really practice a spiritual path, a path that is striving to connect to the divine. You can't really do that if in your spare time or outside of your whatever practices you're doing, you're engaging in sexual corruption or sexual practices that are outside of marriage, harming yourself through drinking and smoking, and generally going to places where there is a corrupt, negative, materialistic environment or atmosphere. So if one is still indulging in a kind of, let's say, hedonistic lifestyle, then whatever extra practices you might be doing, your yoga, your mantras, is not really going to have a a fundamental effect upon your life. I think what people in the West have wanted to do is to take the nice bits from different religions to feel good, and because this has become the religion of the West, striving to feel good, and they have not wanted to actually make the fundamental changes in their lives that require sacrifice in order to really do the hard work of taking yourself apart and reassembling yourself, oriented, deeply oriented towards the divine. So if we're going to talk about embarking on our spiritual path, inshallah, I hope to load up a few videos that may give some tips. And I'm not positioning myself as by any means an expert. I am a student, always will be a student. But I want to, inshallah, share some of my observations that have arisen over the last 20 years. But for now, I will leave you with these thoughts that I've presented as to what's going on again in the West. Not just the West now, because it could be argued that the West is now global. The West is global, and it is absorbing everybody into its framework, into its culture, into its mode of thinking and being. And so the West is not just in the West, we could say, but to think about where we are at, and to think about what someone from the West is doing coming into Islam and what Islam actually offers. And inshallah, I will be talking about that in future videos. So thank you for listening, and inshallah, we'll see you in the next video. Assalamu alaikum.